If you were born with a mole, your fate might already be sealed. In the Middle Ages, a birthmark wasn't just skin, it was the devil's mark. And if that sounds dramatic, it gets worse. The test to prove your innocence used a needle. If it hurt, you were lying. If it didn't, you were possessed. See the trap? Today, we call it biology. Back then, it was a conviction waiting to happen. Stay with this, because we're about to break down how ordinary bodies, yours, mine, were turned into crime scenes, and why the needle test wasn't proof, it was a script. What if a freckle could overrule your testimony before you said a word? Let's unpack how skin turned into a verdict. In many towns, a birthmark, mole, or scar didn't sit on your body as a neutral feature. It carried a story others could write for you. People called it the devil's mark, a ready-made explanation that arrived before any question or defense. You walked in with guilt preloaded because your skin gave them a script. Courts and clergy treated these marks as both the clue and the conclusion. No act had to prove intent. The thing is, when your own body is the exhibit and the jury instruction, what path do you have left? You can't shed a scar or revise a patch of pigment. You stand there while your biology speaks louder than your words. The belief reached beyond simple spots. Any area that seemed insensitive to touch, any discolored patch, any odd mole could be framed as a demonic brand or a so-called witch's teat. Think of it like this: treating a smudge on a user manual as proof the machine is haunted. A surface flaw becomes the cause of everything that goes wrong. Why did this stick? Limited knowledge about basic skin biology set the stage. Terms we use now: nevi for common moles, vascular birthmarks from blood vessels near the surface, and skin tags that grow in friction areas. Had no clear categories then. Without those categories, people filled the gap with stories that fit their fears. Social life did the rest. Neighbors notice what stands out: a darker patch, a raised bump, a scar that healed rough. One comment becomes a rumor, and rumor turns dermatology into theology. Once someone pointed and named the mark, every later moment snapped to that frame. You nursed a child? They called it feeding a familiar. You kept to yourself? They said you were hiding rights. Even skill in everyday tasks bent to the mark's logic. The key insight is this: a common, harmless trait could tip you into the box labeled witch before anyone weighed your choices. Your body set the verdict. Behavior arrived as footnotes. But the mark was only the opening move. The so-called test that followed was built to confirm the story already in play. How do you build a test that always gets the answer you want? Let's break it down. Witch hunters ran a ritual called pricking. They said a true devil's mark would not bleed and would not feel pain. So they searched the skin, found a likely spot, and pressed in a needle. If you flinched, they called you a liar. If you stayed still, they called it proof. The claim sounded anatomical, even clinical, which gave it weight before a crowd. Now, bodies have quirks. Some moles bleed less because of thicker skin. Scar tissue can dull sensation. Pressure on fatty areas can feel muted. That variability wasn't the key to the test's power, though. The mechanism lived in the tools and the rules. Some professional prickers used tricks. A retractable needle that slid into its handle made a puncture look real without a wound. A dulled point crushed rather than pierced, so no blood. The operator knew where to press lightly, where to push harder, and how to stage the sequence. They controlled the outcome long before the verdict was read aloud. The evidence logic closed the cage. If it hurt, you were faking innocence. If it didn't, you carried the mark. There was no exit lane. Think of it like this: a quiz where every option is wrong, and the grader counts any choice against you. Process existed, but not a path to truth. Why keep using it? Money and morale. Officials were paid to find witches, not to clear them. Communities that had weathered disease, failed harvests, or sudden deaths wanted closure. A named culprit soothed chaos. The test performed certainty, which felt like safety. Psychology did the rest, Once labeled, every sensation fit the story. A flinch proved deceit. A calm face proved possession. That's confirmation bias. Evidence bends toward the frame you start with. The tool didn't measure, it validated a narrative already built. The key insight is simple. The needle test looked like investigation, but acted like theater. It laundered suspicion into proof by design. Technique, props, and a crowd gave it authority, while its structure guaranteed a guilty result. With bodies primed as crime scenes, daily habits, sounds, sleep, hands, even household skill would supply the next wave of evidence. Which normal habit, yawning, whistling, or sleepwalking, could flip your life overnight? Let's unpack that. Once a mark sat on your skin, the next move was simple. Find a behavior that looked unusual and lock the story. A mark plus a strange act became a sealed file. Every action after that slotted into the same verdict, no matter how ordinary it was in reality. Start with sound. Whistling in the wrong place did work as a signal. Do it near a graveyard, a church, or at the edge of a forest, and people read it as summoning. Tunes didn't need meaning. The setting supplied it. A note carried across stone or trees could be framed as speech to spirits, not a habit or a way to pass time. Night sealed the suspicion. Without sleep science, moving or murmuring while asleep became demonic roaming. Sleepwalking looked like purposeful travel. Talking in your sleep sounded like secret rites. A door latch open at dawn gave neighbors the final piece. Wandering while others rested meant you kept company they didn't trust. Hands mattered too. Left-handed people carried the sinister label in everyday language. That bias did real work in court and in gossip. If you favored your left hand, your oath looked suspect. Writing, stirring, or blessing with the left became a channel for what people called unclean forces. Skill turned into suspicion with a simple switch of grip. Even a yawn had risk. Some believed the mouth opened a door the soul could slip through. You were supposed to cross yourself. Miss the gesture and people said you invited spirits. A reflex met a rule, and failure to follow the rule became evidence of intent. Animals added fuel. Cats, especially black ones, mapped straight to witchcraft. Normal behavior, rubbing against a leg, watching from a beam, hunting at night, was recast as a familiar spirit doing errands. The animal's independence made it easy to assign purpose you couldn't see. Women's work closed the loop. Brewing and cheese making depended on timing, yeast, heat, and clean vessels. Consistent success looked like power others didn't control. A perfect batch became a spell, not skill. Think of it like this: treating a well-risen loaf as a contract with the unseen instead of proof that the starter was healthy. The pattern is control. Ordinary acts in charged contexts became proof that completed the accusation loop. Now let's connect why the loop held power. It protected social order by policing difference. If magic wasn't the engine, what kept the machine running? Let's shift from single beliefs to the system itself. Law, religion, and community formed a tight circuit. Clergy framed sin and order. Courts translated that moral map into charges. Neighbors supplied the leads. Each part reinforced the others, so once suspicion started, the structure carried it forward. People needed order in hard times. Plague, bad harvests, and conflict stripped away predictability. When outcomes felt random, fear asked for a cause. Accusations supplied it. A named culprit made the world feel legible. You could point, punish, and claim you had restored balance. Here's the mechanism. Random misfortune became a story. The story needed a character who stood out. Visible difference made the casting easy. A strange mark, a left-hand habit, a woman who excelled at work others struggled with. These traits acted like handles the crowd could grab, turning accident into intent. Tests added a scientific sheen without scientific logic. They imitated procedure, tools, steps, witnesses, but lacked falsifiability, the core of real testing. Results were set by rules that only flowed one way. If you reacted, you lied. If you didn't, you were marked. The process filtered inputs until guilt remained. Gender and labor sat at the center. Household economies, brewing, midwifery, dairying, were visible and valuable. Success drew demand, but it also drew envy and oversight. When outcomes varied, skill was ignored and control moved in. Regulation of women's bodies and work looked like morality, but it functioned as management. Think of it like this: a filter that only lets guilty results pass and blocks everything else. Feed it any behavior, any outcome, any explanation. What emerges at the end is the same label. The tool looks neutral, but the mesh decides the product. We still see echoes. Appearance that breaks a norm, or neurodivergent behavior that doesn't match expected cues, can be read as deviance rather than difference. Systems that claim to ensure safety can end up policing bodies, not protecting people. The key insight is clear. Witch trials operated as social technology to manage fear by punishing difference. They served certainty, not truth. So what do we do now? We learn the pattern, label the filter when we see it, and refuse tests that only lead one way. The key insight is simple. The mark, the needle, and the rumor formed a closed loop that turned normal biology into a crime scene. A spot on skin set the charge. A rigged test supplied proof. Talk in the street sealed the verdict. If this changed how you see witch trials, like the video and share one modern test you think is rigged, maybe it's a policy, a screening, or a checklist that can't be passed on its own terms. Stay curious, and we'll keep unpacking the stories that shape how we judge each other. Now, let's take that lens to the next topic we explore.